All right. Hello, science students. We are here with Mrs. Tammy, or Tammy, we're calling her today. And she has a very, very unique, interesting, and cool job that contributes a lot to our world in a unique way that we don't always see. So first of all, Tammy, thanks so much for volunteering your time to talk with me today.
You're very welcome.
And Tammy, if you don't mind, I love this. We're not completely talking about your full name and title because your job overlaps with some pretty sophisticated, important, and sometimes quiet evidence style things. And I'd love to get into that kind of, first of all, what is it your job and what do you do? And then eventually I'd love to get into kind of the pathway, how you got there. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe give us a little background of who you are and what you do.
Okay. I'm a forensic DNA analyst. I work at a local sheriff's crime laboratory, and I analyze DNA evidence. And the reason I'm trying to keep a low profile, not say my full name or the sheriff's office I work at, is because I do end up testifying in court, and I would prefer to, stay a little more
under the radar.
Under the radar.
Awesome. So first of all, before we get into the details of, what you've done in your career and kind of what you see, could you take us on a pathway of kind of where you went through school, et cetera, to actually get into forensics? I think forensics is this cool word and idea, but I think a lot of us, including myself, actually know very little about what forensics is and how you can get there.
Okay, so I'll start way back in the beginning. When I was a kid, I loved mysteries. I loved reading Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, any other types of mysteries I could find. Now, this is back in the dark ages before CSI was on TV, so nobody had ever heard of forensics, including myself. The closest thing we had was a show called Quincy M.E., and this was a medical examiner who would solve cases using forensic science. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world that Quincy could find a single bone in a field, and then he could tell us how tall this person was, their race, their age, what illnesses they had, and all this other stuff, and then he would solve the murder. And I just thought, that's what I want to do when I grow up. That's really cool. I also, back in the days before the internet, when you used to actually have newspapers and magazines on paper, used to just read all the true crime literature. Like if there was a cold case, an old case that maybe 20 years old, and they finally was able to charge and put away the homicidal maniac who did it. I just thought those things are really cool, but still at this time, not knowing what forensic science really was. I went into high school, had a really nurturing biology teacher my freshman year, and he recognized that I had an aptitude for science, and he pushed me, twisted my arm to do contests, competitions, and science fairs and stuff like that. And it was really to my benefit. I owe everything to him. For example, one of the science fairs I was in, they partnered you up with a subject matter expert. And the subject matter expert was a biologist at the Argonne National Laboratories. And through that meeting with him, I ended up getting an internship at Argonne, worked there for 4 summers all through college, and that was a paid internship. So, and then those sorts of things open doors, because once you have a paid internship in a national laboratory, then you can get into graduate school, because the graduate schools think, oh, this person must be pretty smart.
Right.
And then, as your friend, the chemist, who you also interviewed recently, said that he was able to get a fellowship and go to graduate school paid, I was able to do that as well. So free tuition and a stipend, and I got my master's degree that way. So I would highly encourage kids to do these internships and do these competitions and stuff, because you never know what kind of doors they're going to open.
Yeah. So when you were an undergrad, was that at U of I?
Yes, it was.
So when you were an undergrad at U of I, did you know like you wanted to go into forensics, or did you just kind of fall into that through all these connections?
Yeah, okay, so that's another story. I still, at this point, did not know what forensic science was beyond Quincy medical examiner. And I thought, well, maybe I can go to medical school and be a medical examiner. Still not really understanding what the pathway was to a career in forensic science. So I did a general biology degree, pre-med at U of I. I knew I really didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't have that sort of bedside manner, but I wanted to do something in a lab.
Yeah.
So I went on to graduate school. I got like I said, the master's degree in biochemistry. And it was right about that time that crime laboratories started to use DNA evidence.
Okay.
And I started to read about this kind of stuff in those paper newspapers,
Yeah.
magazines. And I realized I could do this. I could use all the science that I had learned to solve mysteries. So that was about that time when I decided to look into it, and learned what a true forensic scientist in a crime laboratory does as opposed to the medical examiner. And was able to get a job in a local crime lab, and have been doing that ever since.
Wow. So could you tell us some of the things, DNA and looking at it in that, when you, I guess, forgive me, but my experience, again, like you said, is like CSI. So I try to tell my students, like, you're not running around catching the bad guys with the guns and then dusting off for prints and then going to the lab late at night and doing your analysis. I told them those are all very specialized jobs.
Right.
So
Right.
what would be like your specialized job, and what does that kind of look like on a day-to-day basis? You know, are you in front of computers? Are you working with blood splatter? What is it all about?
So I personally work in the DNA section of the laboratory. So I get evidence that has suspected biological fluids on it. I identify those biological fluids as to what they are, and then I will analyze them for DNA profiles. And there are forensic scientists who might do crime scenes. I don't personally do that. My sheriff's department has a specialized unit of crime scene technicians. That's all they do, so I don't go to the crime scene. Most of my day is in front of a computer. Mm-hmm. Almost everything we do is hooked up to a computer, and there's a lot of data crunching that needs to be done by the computer.
So when you're doing those things, looking at data and that, are you using a lot of math? Is it a lot of looking for trends? What kind of everyday skills does it require for you to be doing all that kind of stuff?
So I do use math on a daily basis, and a lot of it is statistical applications. Okay. So a lot of just adding, subtracting,
sure.
Percentages, but then statistics as well.
Cool.
And computer programs that help us to do that sort of stuff.
Okay, cool. Now, a quick question again, forgive me for jumping in. If you were talking about some specialists that are going to the crime scene, some of you guys are there specifically, is there, in the world of forensics, are you able to move around, or do you really get into your niche, become an expert, and you kind of stay there?
That could depend on the type of crime lab that you work at. Some smaller crime labs that have less staff, maybe in a small town or something, they're going to be wearing more hats and doing more things. But typically, most of us are very specialized in our one thing. One thing I could think of is like a trace chemist they're kind of a jack of all trades because they might look at hairs, fibers, paint, explosive chemicals. So they have sometimes more of a diverse caseload than some of the rest of us.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. And again, as I explained before we hit the record button, I'm pretty ignorant to the forensics world. So just kind of trying to ask all those questions that hopefully I think of my students would be asking because, media just paints this picture of what forensics looks like, but it's really cool to hear what's really going on in that. Cool. So as far as the work you do with DNA and that, have you seen it affect any cases? I know we're not allowed to talk about specific cases in that, but have you felt like your work has contributed to helping solve, et cetera?
Oh, absolutely. I have been doing this for over 20 years. And so a lot of the cases that I have worked have gone all the way through to arrest, conviction, and court. Yeah, absolutely. I've been able to see that, and I feel like it gives some closure and some, it gives me meaning, when I see that.
Yeah, you do that. What a great purpose to have. You're helping people figure out what really happened in some of these crimes. And thank you for doing that. That's probably an unsung hero thing. You don't get thanked very often, I bet, but you're a super important part. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, for the different jobs you've done in that and that you see, and I know that you're great and sometimes talk to other schools in that, what are some of the skills you've noticed that have helped you or helped people grow in their careers and fields in forensics that you feel like is something that you can't overlook that you really need to get down with?
Mm-hmm. All right, so first of all, to be a forensic scientist, you have to have a bachelor's degree in a natural science. So biology, chemistry, physics, or forensic science. There are forensic science degree programs, and they're fine, but it is also perfectly fine to get a natural science degree. Like I have a biology BS and a biochemistry MS, so that was a fine way to get into that pathway. You want good speaking skills because ultimately cases might end up in court and you need to explain very sophisticated scientific concepts in a way that the jury is going to understand.
So does that mean you find yourself in court sometimes?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes,
good point.
Mm-hmm. You want good note-taking skills, good observational skills. So some ways you can do this even as a high school student to develop these skills would be, to take laboratory courses, take other types of courses where you're observing things, maybe a photography course or something. You want good writing skills because, again, you write a scientific report for an audience of typically cops and lawyers, and so you have to present those scientific concepts in a way that they're going to be able to understand that. So take English courses, take writing classes, any types of writing courses, journalism, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you have to be pretty well-rounded because you're not just in the lab, but you're the middle person between the evidence or data and, of course, like you said, the police or the lawyers so that information can get there properly so that it's not biased and so that it's there so that it's delivered in the proper way, which can affect the case. That's a lot on your shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the next thing I was going to say. You have to be unbiased. You're speaking for the science. You can't get caught up in the facts of the case. And sometimes they can be very emotionally charged cases. And then finally, a very important point is personal integrity. Some of the deal breakers are drunk driving conviction, any felony convictions, drug abuse. So, and these things will be found out because when you are getting a job in a crime laboratory, you go through a thorough background investigation and, you might have to take polygraph tests.
Yeah, you got to have a clean record to work with the sheriffs. I mean, that makes complete sense. Absolutely. Yeah, and you brought up a good point, and something that we try to talk about in high school, but I don't know if it really hits, is that unbiased part. I imagine if you're working with a very, like you said, emotional case where you really feel like this person did something terrible to another person, but that evidence doesn't seem to show that, I could see how emotionally as a human you would want the evidence to be a certain way to help solve the case, and it might not help in any way for whatever sample you got. So that's definitely a point of integrity and being unbiased. You've really got to stick with the data. So I never even thought about that emotional stress side of that job.
Right, right.
Wow.
Exactly. We're speaking for the science, and whatever the science shows is what we have to present.
Yeah, that's a great point. Awesome. When you work, I know that you said that sheriff's departments have different sizes in that. Do you work with a large group of people, a few individual people?
Actually, our sheriff's department crime lab is not very big. There's about 12 of us in total, and there are 5 of us in the DNA section. So, it's not a very big group.
Do you find that you're working with each other a lot, or is it very individualized?
Well, usually each person does most of the analysis for a case. We don't work with each other on cases specifically, but we will work with each other to learn concepts or to validate new techniques. And also, everything we do is reviewed. So I will work a case all the way through, and a second analyst will review all of my data and sign off and verify that it was all done correctly and that the reporting is correct as well.
Yeah, another thing you bring up that I don't think of on your shoulders is that evidence could be life or death for someone in the end. So having that double checked makes complete sense. Just things you don't think about from the outside looking in.
Right, right. One other way that I collaborate with a person in the lab is we have an analyst who does a lot of the initial work before I pick it up and do DNA analysis. She might do some of the identification of the body fluids on the evidence, collecting the evidence from collecting the body fluids from the item of evidence, and then I will take it from there and do the DNA analysis.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, this has been so great and shining a light on a subject that we talk about a lot, but I don't know as students and teachers if we really know a lot about forensics in that. So some of the takeaway things, thanks so much, is having unbiased science, being a good communicator, being a great observer. And I think you're right. Like art classes, photography, and that allow you to look at spaces and really take note of it and take that in. That's beneficial. You really do need to be a well-rounded human in order to do the job that you do well, because there's so many different aspects from the technical science side to just talking to everyday people like our incredible police officers that need that information, but maybe don't need the nitty-gritty of how exactly you found that DNA stuff. So excellent. So I do want to respect your time in that. Was there any other main ideas or topics or things you wanted to mention before going? And I don't want to put you on the spot if you didn't. But while you're thinking about that, I just want to say thanks so much for your time. This has been super great to look into what forensic scientists do.
You are so welcome. There's a whole lot more we could probably talk about if we care to get into the details.
Right. I know that we've said that before, and I thank you for your time, Tammy. And maybe one day it would be great eventually if we could get you to come to the school. I know you do put on a great full presentation that goes even more in depth, but this is at least scratching the surface. And my hope is that you've just created, 10, 15 new forensic scientists that might be interested in going. If they do have any questions or that, if you don't mind, I'll field them through me to maybe occasionally ask you, so that way we can keep your identity more on the down low. But if you don't mind, I'll do that just in case they do have further questions. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
All right. Well, Tammy, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hit the unrecord button so that we can officially stop our interview in that. And then I'd love to talk to you a few minutes afterwards just to say thanks in that. All right, science students, I hope you got a lot out of this. Being a well-rounded human never hurts you in any way. And if you love in science, communication, and solving crimes, this sounds like a great potential opportunity and door. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks again to Tammy for everything that she said and did and shared with us today. Thanks, Tammy.